Got a good one here today. It's Jim Beebe and Lucas Lorian with Athlete Builder. We're back in the library, and today we're very blessed to have completely different guests on than we normally have. We have a real expert here, not the other guys weren't, but Dr. Taryn Marie Stejskal. So met her a little while back at a speaking summit and learned a lot about her and her fiance Mike. But Dr. Taryn, she's founder and chief resilience officer at the Resilience Leadership Institute, recognized internationally expert on resilience, mental health, well-being, both leadership, and in life. She serves as the chief well-being officer for Blue Vase RX, a company that provides distribution, sales, marketing for pharmaceutical manufacturers, ensures patients receive the medications that they need to live a healthier life. Got a great book out, The 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People, Why Some Flourish When Others Fold. Already number 1 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. Got it right here.
Woo!
Read the whole thing cover to cover this past weekend. Learned a lot, outlined the whole thing. We're good to go. Global Gurus has Dr. Taryn as a top 30 thinker in leadership. She's a Marshall Goldsmith top 100 global executive coach. What else? She's featured on Fox, NBC News, The Tamron Hall Show, Bloomberg Business. Her TEDx talk entitled How Resilience Breaks Us Out of Our Vulnerability Cage has been viewed more than 1 million times. USA Today named Dr. Taryn as one of the top 10 entrepreneurs for 23. And let's get started, right? Before
Let's
that,
get started.
what did you do before that? Head executive leadership at Nike and head of global leadership at Cigna. Got a bachelor's from Michigan, master's, doctor at Maryland. Did some pre and postdoctoral work. Geez, oh Pete. She also runs her own podcast. That's a 1%er called Flourish or Fold, Stories of Resilience. She was a high-level swimmer in high school. She's got 2 awesome boys, Samson and Sawyer, and one fiance named Mike. And Dr. T and I are collaborating on a joint venture now. Taryn sought out a number of folks, 25, 30, 35 people to write about resilience personally and professionally. And one of her next books coming out, I'm happy to say I'm one of the fortunate guys that's helped contribute a small piece. So got Dr. T here. She's legit. I met her, and great personality, great persona at the Resilience Leadership Institute. What does she do there? There's executive coaching. There's succession planning and talent strategy for corporations. If it's just you and you want to get better, there's an online course called Flourish. Also does keynote speaking. She has her own podcast, and she has her own blog. Dang, right? Dr. Taryn, welcome to the show. Great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just over here eating bonbons,
Right.
living the soft life.
Just getting right into it. The big challenge with desiring or building any impactful traits is that they must be built. And if you pray for patience, God is not going to send you patience. He's going to send you trying times so you can build patience. So if you or I have built a resilient person or a resilient company, then you really got to think that person or that company, they must have at least endured and probably endured some pain. And then they healed, learned, and hardened probably in some areas. And then they bounced not back. Like you said, they bounced forward, right? So you get right in your book, and I read this book, like I said, this past weekend, and right from the get-go, bam, high school, right? Trying times. Take us through that a little bit on those issues early on. We were like, well, shit, man, this is really pretty heavy right off the bat. Talk about that a little bit, Taryn. I was like, dang, look at this.
I know it got real quick for me at a pretty young age. That's for sure. A couple things. One, to your point, when we think about developing ourselves or developing athletes or developing children, a lot of people ask me, are resilient people or are resilient leaders, are they born or are they made? Of course, we're all born, so that's an easy one. But there's a belief out there that we're sort of born with a static amount of resilience, and that's it. That's all we get. And then we just go through life with sort of a limited store of resilience or perseverance or grit. And we simply know now that that just isn't true, right? So just as in athletics, we can increase our muscle mass, we can increase our stamina, we can increase our cardiovascular ability, we can also increase our resilience. And the primary way that we increase our resilience is in the natural and, in some ways, unfortunately, unavoidable moments of facing the big 3 C's of challenge, change, and complexity. And these are the fabric of our lives. This is the fabric of what it means to be human. We're not getting out of here without facing, many, many trials, many, many tribulations. I remember my friends early on said, "Are you sure you want to do this resilience thing? Because aren't you sort of like calling towards you, just like an immense amount of challenge?" And let's just start by saying that, a lot of times when we face challenge, people will say to us, well, God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, or, there's a reason, why this is happening. I think those are really terrible things to say to people. I don't know if, you've been in a tough time and people have said that to you, but it's really not comforting at all.
Mm-mm.
But I think what we can say is that not a drop of pain is wasted in our formation. And that has been so powerful for me ever since I was younger, because even when I've been in the midst of it, even when we're in the midst of just something so difficult and we don't know how we're going to get out of it, if we're going to get out of it, if this is just who we are now, when we think to ourselves, God doesn't waste a drop of pain in our formation, that to me is comforting, because it's like, no matter how much this hurts, like at least it is leading to something, right? Like after we do a big workout, we wake up the next day and we're like all sore. And it's like, ouch, this hurts. But there's also a part of me that's like, yeah, it hurts. That means I did a good job in the gym yesterday. That means I'm building. That means I'm growing, right? Relative to athletics. And so I think we get to start with this idea that not a drop of pain is wasted, that it is all being used for our formation. So I'll just stop there with a little bit of sort of context setting, if you will. And then, I'm glad to start with some challenging stories from high school, or maybe there's something there, Jim, you want to respond to or highlight.
Well, one, I like taking notes on things, and I write down resilience is the ability to effectively address challenge, change, and complexity in a manner that allows us to be enhanced by the experience, not diminished. And people, like you said, like if I'm suffering through something and says, "Hey, well, this is all happened for a reason," you really want to give them the finger and say, "This is bullshit." I don't want to hear that
Yep.
right now, right? And I've done that. And I said, "Hey, I'm going to tell you this sucks, right? This next piece sucks. A heavy back squat sucks. Running 10 miles sucks. Dealing with a breakup sucks." And then all these things are, if you can believe it, in a sick kind of way. Unfortunately, I'm going to say this, these are all little gifts that help build you, right? Building a bigger back squat, building more endurance, building more personal empathy or whatever, right? These things are gifts because they allow or enable you to evolve. And unfortunately, the sick thing is that you don't really get to evolve that much without some real challenges, right? So you really don't. Like you don't get to have a big squat or a big broad jump if you can't move the bar, right? You just don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about being resilient, and these athletes that we talk to, or just people professionally, whether you run your own small business, or if you're a school teacher dealing with 100 kids like Jack, like Lucas is, there's a level of resilience that has to be built through the trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
One thing I can totally identify with when you write down in the book that you're dyslexic and words get kind of jumbled up, and I'm like, well, I've been like that for the longest time, never talked to anybody about that, but like reading comprehension for me is terrible. When I was a kid, I would literally, like in my desk at home, I would just sit here like this, trying not to be distracted, and I would focus on the words. And you're right, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I read better? Why does everyone in school read better than me? You just feel like an idiot or a loser.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about, well, I had this, but then I figured some things out, and then I grew from it, right? So that's the part that I love. You said You're enhanced by the experience, not diminished. Talk about that. That's quote alone that you put in there, which I loved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, a quote that I really love alongside that is by a person by the name of Maria Rilke Rayner. Or sorry, Maria Rayner Rilke. Um, three name poet and writer. Of course, my dyslexia would come in on that. And he talks about that growth is about the ability to be defeated by greater and greater things. And I remember the first time I read that and I thought to myself, well, that sounds awful. Like
Mm,
I'm just going to keep getting defeated but just by a bigger thing next time. Like that doesn't sound like something I want to sign up for. But then I was thinking about it the other day, and I think that's what striving toward a goal is. I think that's what being an athlete is we go for a prize, and maybe the first time we're going to, state championships, national championships, the Olympics, whatever it is, maybe we don't make the team. Maybe we don't make the cut. Maybe our time isn't good enough or our play isn't good enough, but then, so you're defeated by that, right? But you're not defeated, because now you've got the fire inside of you to say, what am I going to do with that defeat? Am I going to allow that to define me, or am I going to use that? Am I going to harness that energy, that experience, to allow myself to be ultimately enhanced by that experience and not diminished by it? And that's what that quote means. And when we're in the moment of challenge, whether it's a difficult workout, whether it's a difficult time in our lives, just about no one is like, oh, this is really wonderful. Like, I love the gifts of adversity. Like, wow, this is really making me a better
right.
person. Oh, I have a flat tire on my way to some fantastic. Look at me. It's not that, right? And in fact, it's difficult to recognize our resilience because typically when resilience shows up, we're feeling pretty shitty about the stuff that's going on in our lives. And so when we demonstrate real resilience, we're not necessarily in a place where we're feeling good. And I think that's hard to recognize. But what it means is that being able to look at that challenge and allowing it to expand us, allowing us to grow, it does become the gifts of adversity. Or as Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in his books, he called it a desirable disadvantage, something, a disadvantage that becomes titrated in our lives in such a way that it doesn't defeat us, it doesn't diminish us, it inspires us, it builds character within us. An example of that he gives is, about a third of the presidents that have ever occupied the White House in the United States lost a parent at a young age, under the age of 12. A third of presidents, a third of leaders of our nation have that in common. And Gladwell refers to that as a desirable disadvantage. Like, it's not desirable to lose a parent, certainly, and certainly not at a young age. That is an incredibly traumatic experience for a young child. But what happened for each and every one of those people is they took one of the worst things that can happen, the loss of a parent at a young age, and they were able to harness that experience and allow it to make them better, to make them stronger, to make them more compassionate, more empathetic, to enhance their wisdom. And that is how challenge gets to shape and form us in a way that it makes us better.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Alex Hormozy,
I know Alex.
he would say, or he said, we just want to solve bigger problems. Like, I don't have to solve the problem on who's unloading the dishwasher, or who's taking out the trash, or who's taking out the trash at the gym even, or who can you just squat the bar, or can you run, an 8-second 40 time. You want to solve bigger problems for your athlete or the team or the company, because the bigger problems for me aren't necessarily one that can be kind of fun and challenging, but it simply means, at least for me, that we're making a bigger impact. I'm not making a big impact on the world if I take out the trash. I'm a little bit, right? But if we can train 10 kids on the Special Olympic team to be healthier, all right, there's impact. And if I could train 10 gyms that train 10 kids, now there's 100, right? So well, how do you work with 10 gyms? Well, shit, I don't know, but we're going to work on that. So in my mind, like you point out, like you don't get out of here. You don't get out of here and by here, I mean life. You don't get out of here without these challenges. And we want bigger problems. We want bigger things to solve because then we make a bigger impact. And that's exactly what I took a lot out of your book from that.
We want to be defeated by bigger and bigger things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No one goes undefeated in everything. Everyone has these setbacks, and then you learn. Also, what I like with Ray Dalio, his logo on his books, he's the Bridgewater founder, right? The largest investment firm. And it's this little squiggle, right? And it's like you start off and you have a little squiggle, a circle that comes back and then takes off again. He's like, it's your feedback loop. That's their logo. It's like, all you want is a quicker and quicker feedback loop. I want more and more iterations so I can get that negative feedback so I can adjust quickly and then evolve faster and solve the bigger problem, And the resilient things that is a huge driver and component of that because you have to stick with it, right?
Yeah, and here's an interesting thing about that for me as a woman. So there's been a lot written for women in particular that the vast majority of women will not apply for a job if they don't meet 100% of the criteria. Have you heard this?
I did not know that, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would. I don't know, it's more women than men, but I would think a lot of people would say, if I can't check all the boxes, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. So something like, a really significant statistic, like let's just say 95% of women won't apply for a job unless they meet 100% of the criteria. But like only 60% of men, won't apply if they don't meet 100% of the criteria, right? And so there's this sort of, we talk about like gender and the way that we move in the world. It's like, well, why is that? And then I looked at my own life and it's like, I'll apply for a job, if I meet 50% of the criteria. Because I think, I'm in that like 5% apparently of women that will do that. And so I was like, okay, well, why do I do that? Well, I think I do that because when I look at that job description, that is not the greatest thing that has ever happened in my life. Like I've grappled with PTSD. I had a stalker in high school. That's all in the book. I was a very promising nationally ranked swimmer. I developed something called thoracic outlet syndrome, which is a medical diagnosis where my arms started going numb in practice just by the sort of structure of my body, which is, basically like a career-ending, thing for a swimmer. And so for me to give up a sport that I loved, that I had an incredibly promising, future in, to grapple with having a stalker that I didn't know why he was there, having developed PTSD, I look at a job description where I don't meet 100% of the criteria, and I'm like, all right, I can do that. I can learn that. I can do that. And so, the way that we experience our lives also is how we view the lens of how big that challenge is, right? I don't mean to say that other women haven't faced large challenges, but I think when we face large challenges, a job description stops being, so scary or so daunting. And we begin to have a greater confidence within ourselves of what we're capable of and a belief that we can figure things out, even if we don't necessarily know how we're going to figure the things out.
100% agree. And it's probably the reason that Lucas and I are teamed up together. We said it before in other episodes. Like COVID hit in 2020 and people are like, hey, Jim, you worry about shutting down the gym and what you're doing? I'm like, well, I started in my garage. I had my car repossessed and my utilities turned off the first year. As in 13, I'm like, I made it through 7 years of that stuff with declining revenue at first and all these other problems. I'm like, I'm probably going to be okay. And my boy Lucas is, like he told you, 2 different job stints where he has to sleep in his car for a while to make it happen, right? And so when I come to him and we're like, hey, we're going to put together this podcast about getting people better because it really just takes some different thought processes and a consistency at doing it. And if you and I simply just apply the approach where we're just gonna keep working at it a little bit each day and not give up, I think we're probably just gonna be just fine, you know. And so when you say, "Are you worried about COVID?" I'm like, "No, because I already slipped in the car. Already things were already looking pretty shitty once, you know. And if I got someone who's stalking me, maybe gonna try to kill me, I'm probably not worried about an ad in the paper or a resume check. You know, I'm probably not worried about that." So that's where it's a sick thing, though. You want someone really resilient. I tell these kids that are high school, I'm like, well, I'm really gonna have to put you through some horrible things to get you there, and we're gonna do it incrementally, not all at once, but this is what's coming, right? And that's when you kind of like start weeding out the folks that really are going to be playing in college or going to be playing in the pros, because if you don't want to do it, then you don't get to solve bigger problems, right? And that's the hard part.
Dr. Taryn, I have a quick question about some of your thoughts on today's young athletes and young kids. Do you think that there are I want to word this correctly. Do you think there is a real lack of adversity that, like, kids these days and athletes these days, is there a lack of adversity, or is there a lot of adversity that's somewhat fabricated in their head? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm just, I feel like it's a touchy question and a kind of maybe a controversial question, but I'm just curious. And maybe what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, we touched upon the fact that I have two sons that are 12 and 10. And I'd say a couple of things about that. One, I think as parents, and being a parent myself, there's a very natural tendency to want to protect our children from bad or negative things, right? And there comes a point where when we protect our children from too many things, or when we protect our children from everything, we've actually done them a disservice because we haven't allowed them to live in a world where they experience difficulty or adversity. And I think the way to do that, and I'm fortunate that I have a psychology, neuropsychology, marriage and family therapy background, is to do that to the extent possible in an age appropriate way, right? What do I mean by that? So I tell the story in my book. There's a parenting chapter, and I wrote the parenting chapter not because I'm, some fabulous, parent. I've done some things right and I've made some mistakes, but people have consistently come to me after podcasts like this, after keynote speaking, and said, "I wish my 14-year-old daughter could have heard this," or "I wish I could send this to my son in college because this would really help him," or "How can I be a better parent in a way that amplifies not only my own resilience or the resilience of my children?" And so when my younger son was 4, we were getting ready to put him into kindergarten, and our sort of like catchment had blown up, right? So whereas for his brother, that's just, 2 years in school, we sort of sauntered in over the summer, signed him up for kindergarten, done, right? They opened up kindergarten in January of his year, and the first day there was a wait list of 8 kids, So we put him on, so he ends up being on the wait list number 9. And we've been telling him the whole time that he's going to go to the same school as his big brother, all this stuff. So, what do we do in those situations a lot of times as parents? Well, we just don't tell kids what's going on. We sort of hide that challenge from him. And I thought, this is a great opportunity for him to be aware of what's happening, So I shared with him that he was on the wait list, and that the wait list was a bit long, and we were going to see what happened over the summer. Well, he moves up. So now he's the first one on the wait list, right? And so I went to the women in the office. They were doing their kindergarten roundup, and I said, we're not sure if Sawyer's going to get in. School starting in a couple weeks, but in the event that he does get in, would it be okay if I brought him, to the kindergarten roundup or whatever with the teachers? And they were appalled. They were like, "Why would you do that? If he doesn't get in, what will you tell him?" And I said, "Well, we've been talking to him all along, and we told him, that he's on the wait list and that we've steadily moved up, and we'd like for him to go to this school and this is our first choice. But if he doesn't, we've got a backup or a plan B. And we'll explain to him that he's going to go meet the other children and students, with the idea that, we hope he gets in. And so it's just a microcosm of allowing him to be aware of, in an age appropriate way, that there is some ambiguity, there is some uncertainty, there is some challenge, and then helping him deal with that experience, right, in a way that allows him to develop those skills, that allows him to stand in that space of discomfort and know how to deal with that mentally and emotionally. And so now, as he and his brother get older, I see them lose games, and I see other kids, throwing stuff and crying, and they just don't do that, because the loss of a game is not the biggest challenge that they've ever faced. And they have a series of skills, and we've consciously developed their mindset to be able to effectively deal with that. And so anytime we go to a game, I say, hey, you've got 4 jobs today, right? Number 1, have fun. Number 2, do your best. Number 3, learn something. And number 4, get better. And if you do those 4 things, right? Have fun, do your best, learn something, and get better, you're going to be a better athlete tomorrow. You're going to be a better athlete the next day, And I think, the converse is true. I think we also put too much pressure on kids too early. We've got 9-year-olds like running around the state, playing travel baseball and putting all kinds of pressure on them in 4th grade. And it's like, for what? Like you track these kids and they actually end up washing out. We've got a belief, you're nodding your head, Jim. We've got a belief, we believe in the prodigy. It's a prodigy fallacy, right? That the kids that are the smartest and the most talented at age 8, 9, or 10 are going to be the ones that are in that same position later on. And the problem is oftentimes those kids aren't, because they don't deal with enough adversity early on. And there's so much pressure on them to be good and to be great and to work ahead in school and to be 2 years ahead in math and to do all this stuff that it's exhausting. It's exhausting and it's overwhelming. And so I think what we've done, with all of the best intentions as parents, is we've either shielded children from adversity or pushed them too hard and put too much pressure on them to perform at an age that is not old enough to handle that level of pressure.
I love that.
Yes. The 4 things you had right there, we have 6 core values, in our book and in the gym. And one of them is enjoyment. So we're going to ask you to do some unpleasant things, but you have to kind of, you actually have to kind of like what you're doing there. Do your best. One of our other core values is integrity. So you're trying to do your best. And then, learn and get better. Like Kaizen is another core value that we have. So that Japanese business term. So 100% agree with that. And you mentioned Gladwell's books like Outliers. It's not that, he points out in the book that it's not that Bill Gates was some prodigy. Like, he was excellent with computers and all, but his parents had access to computers out in Washington because they had some in there at the university. So he would stay up all night and would have an extra 10 hours on the computer that no one else did. So you multiply that times, 1,000 days. Well, now he has, 10,000 hours pretty quickly, and no one else does. So now he just learned so much. That's why he got to be pretty good at developing operating systems. So,
and he enjoyed it. He had fun doing it. Kids don't want to stick with stuff that they hate.
That's right.
If we make kids sit down and you got to practice your French horn, you got to do your piano, and it's 2 hours, and and now we're gonna go all day and do drills and stuff. Like, we don't stick with things that we don't like. And so I believe in, how do we instill within our children an ability to face difficult times, an ability to face adversity, and also to sustain them through those moments with, like, how are they going to love this game?
Yeah.
And how are they going to love themselves even when they make a mistake? Well, did you learn something? Okay. Then You did your job today.
The other thing I believe here is that for these kids that want to play in college and the pros, you said they have to love it a little bit. So if everyone's doing their French horn a couple hours a day, all right, you're doing enough. You said it, you sign up for French horn, you're participating, you're checking the box, you're going to be good at it, maybe pretty good. And that's fine. You go through school and you learn the arts, you learn athletics, you learn all your classes. So you're well-rounded, so you can handle a bunch of different endeavors. And then you kind of find yourself in your career and whatnot. Every once in a while, someone just loves it. Someone loves the French horn. Gretzky didn't want to go play with his friends outside and do things. He wanted to practice hockey, right? Not everybody wants to practice hockey all the time. Some people will practice and be good, and they'll be fine. They could play in high school. They might even play in college. But if you want to be the greatest of all time, it's those rare folks that absolutely love that endeavor. And Bill Gates is fantastic. He loved that endeavor. If you don't love it, that's okay. You'll probably just be a really good parent and a good worker and a good contributor to society. Great. What's wrong with that? Right? That's fantastic. It's just those that want to be great, then I don't have to tell them to obsess about things. They already are, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes it easy.
Mm-hmm.
I had some things I loved about the myths and truths of resilient people. And here's why. So a few of them I'm just going to point out quickly. You said bounce forward, not back. You said time doesn't heal always. Resilience is an active process, not passive. The nature versus nurture. You're born a certain way, but you have to work at it. So what I love about this book, right, is that, yeah, you have these stories and all, but you tell people, here's how you do things. Here's how you handle it. And you give 5 very reasonable and well thought out and structured approaches, whether it's vulnerability, productive perseverance, connection, gratiosity, I'm saying that right, and then possibility.
Mm-hmm. Good job.
So with the myths, you said, don't ignore your internal self. Connect deeply with it. So I want to dive in there. So I ask my athletes about their core values and their identity questions to find out why they're doing things. But you said, don't ignore your internal self. Connect deeply with it. How and why is that important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I believe that we all have access to our higher power, to a greater knowledge, to the divinity that exists within all of us. We have a higher self that lives within us. We have a knowing intuition that we all have the ability to hear. And we get to cultivate that to a greater extent, whether that's hearing the voice for the first time or hearing the voice in a way that we can understand what it's telling us, or trusting that voice, within us. And so I think so often we look externally for validation. We look externally for people to tell us who we are and what our purpose is and what we're meant to be doing and are we doing a good job. And sure, when we think about athletics, like that's the role of the coach, to give us feedback, to coach us up, to make us better. It's also about learning to trust ourselves, to befriend ourselves, to believe deeply in ourselves, to stake ourselves. When I look at poker players that are, betting extreme sums of money, can lose it all or win it all with one hand. There was an experience where, I knew a gentleman who was staking other poker players financially, and he himself was also very good. And so he decided to play in a large tournament. And I said, stake yourself. You've given all of these other people money, to go on the circuit and, to chase, the final table, but you're also good enough to play in this game. And so the act of him sitting down at the table and deciding to stake himself financially versus putting his belief in his finances behind someone else was incredibly powerful. And that's what we need to do in life to be great, is we've got to stake ourselves. We've got to believe that we have the capability and the capacity to become the imagined vision that we have for ourselves, and then be willing to put in the work to cultivate the talent to close the gap between where we are today and what we imagine for ourselves tomorrow.
That's it right there, because you're going to believe it some without having done or earned the confidence, because confidence comes from reps, we say. But once you get a rep where, like, you know what, I'm a little faster now. Now I can dribble with the left hand and my right hand, right? Or with you with swimming, hey, maybe you were fast, but maybe you weren't good at flip turns. All right, now I can say, hey, I'm faster here. So you got to believe yourself in a little bit. Then you give yourself the extra work, then says, hey, man, shoot, look at me. Like, I've done these things. I'm probably okay. Like, you really go out and, like you said, it's not passive. You have to go out and earn it too. So that's the whole second piece. It's not just meditating and envisioning the goal. It's envisioning the goal and envisioning the work that you're going to do and then doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said in your book, man, I love that. That was great. It's not optimism. It's optimism and realism. Got to have them both together, right? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, in athletics, I think in particular, and in elite athletics, and this is one of the things that I worked with our marquee athletes on at Nike, is oftentimes the way that we've understood manifestation or envisioning things is we have our athletes like envision winning the game, winning the trophy, running across home plate, doing the corner kick into the goal and it, sliding into the net, just inside the crossbars, that kind of thing. And that type of visioning is powerful. But actually what's more powerful, we know now, is having our athletes envisioning themselves doing the work to get to the end goals. So now I'm envisioning myself waking up in the morning, getting my nutrition right, putting my amino acids in my water, going to my workout or going to my first workout, doing my cardio, meeting my numbers, hitting my protein goals for the day, going back in the afternoon for my second workout or for, and now we're having our athletes envision the process of putting in the work to get to the goal that they're envisioning. And what we understand is that that's actually a superior way of visioning. That in fact, when we look at two groups, one where we ask them to just focus on the ultimate dream or goal, and the one where we ask them to envision these steps that they are going to take to get to the dream or goal. It's the second group that actually envisions themselves doing the work, maps out their day, and then focuses on how that is going to ladder to the ultimate, kind of goal at the time. Those are the ones that do better.
Yeah, I wrote that down, and actually I sent some of this stuff to Jack. He's my oldest. He plays football for Ball State, and he's just started summer workouts this week. So a lot of value there. I'll get to the whole Seth Joyner thing here in a little bit here, but found a lot of value with that one as well. In your 5 different components and practices, you talk about vulnerability. So talk about why that's important, and for younger folks, and a lot of folks in general, not necessarily just young. Why is that hard for people? Why is that hard, and why is it important?
Yeah, I talked about this earlier today. I was doing a keynote for an organization, and when people hear vulnerability, it's ultimately like a sort of retraction. It's like ugh, vulnerability, ugh, when I'm speaking to big audiences of hundreds or even thousands of people, I love to ask the question, who here is living your most fabulous, vulnerable life? Like 2 hands will go up, if that. And so I say, like, why is that? Right. And Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and, some other, kind of people are talking about this. And so if we know that vulnerability is good for us, or that it creates greater connection, greater authenticity, greater empathy, why aren't we doing it? Because there's a large expanse between what we know and what we actually do. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's also because we misunderstand vulnerability. We think about vulnerability as discrediting ourselves. We think about it as degrading ourselves, like self-deprecating humor, or I'm going to point out my flaws before you do, right? I'm going to like beat you. And none of that actually is vulnerability. We're discrediting ourselves, but that's not being vulnerable, right? That's a preemptive strike to try to take ammunition from someone else in areas where we're already insecure or not confident. And so what vulnerability actually is it's taking our inside self, our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences, and to the greatest extent possible, wearing that on the outside, like allowing people to see that in an authentic and real way. And the closer that inside version of ourself, our thoughts, feelings, and experience matches that outside self that we're sharing with the world, the more congruent we are, if we will. That's true vulnerability, because we're allowing people to see us and to know us, as close as possible to what is most real for us internally.
Now, is that like kind of saying? Is that like saying wearing your emotions on your sleeve almost?
Yeah, that's a great example. It's a great example. It's making the inside that's sort of invisible visible on the outside. So I love that you're connecting that with, how
People
that
don't like
might
that.
look like. What was that?
People don't like that.
Yeah. But why not? Why don't we like it?
I think it's because there is a level of fear that you're not going to like me, and then you won't love me, and then you're going to abandon me. And if I'm going to be left alone, then fuck, that hurts, right? So they don't want to show any weaknesses. And when you just show that you are who you are, some people like you or not like you, but those that still want to hang out and be around, now you're going to have some legit relationships. And if you're an athlete and you can develop some teammates on your squad that accepts you for who you are, and you can be real with those folks and they can be real with you, then you have a stronger bond, and then you have a stronger team because you guys are trusting in each other and you believe in each other, right? And if you're fearful and you give into a fear, you're reinforcing being somewhat of a coward because you let the fear win, right? Even if it's preconceived in your head and it's not even real. So I think that's why people do it. And once they do it once well, they're vulnerable well, and they get some positive reinforcement, they're like, well, shoot, I got a little more confidence. Maybe I'll try it again. At least that was my thought when I read that section in your book.
First of all, sorry for interrupting earlier. What would you say to? Because I feel like there's a stigma amongst, especially teachers and especially coaches, that you are supposed to be the best peak version of yourself every single day, and if you are having a bad day, not to show it in a way. Now, what would you say to that then? Because I feel like that's true in some sense, and I feel like sometimes it's not true. I
I would
remember
say,
working.
oh, go ahead.
I just remember working for places, and it was you better find a way to be the most energetic, positive person on the planet, and if you're not, that's not good enough. And I'm
Mhm.
just curious on how, if someone's not like that, how are they going to be able to lead and teach other, most likely younger people?
Yeah, well, I think you've missed a tremendous opportunity to lead and teach younger people about authenticity and empathy and vulnerability. Because what you've done is you've whitewashed your experience and you've put on a veneer that is not true or authentic as a means of demonstrating that it is possible to always be at the peak highest version of yourself. And I think we know that's simply not true. So then I think we get to think about from a coaching standpoint, okay, so you're hired to do a job, right? Which is to be a coach, right?
Right.
And I'm hired to do a variety of things, to also be an executive coach, to be a keynote speaker. That means no matter what kind of day I'm having, when I go out on that stage, I'm hired to inspire and entertain. And the audience is not there to take care of me and to help me process my day, right? But can I, in the context of that conversation with the audience, talk about the process that I went through to get myself to that point to show up for them, because there's some really tough things that are happening for me in the background, and maybe I even enumerate what those are and then connect that to what resilience is and what resilience means? Absolutely. Because now what we have is a teachable moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still doing my job as a keynote speaker. You're still doing your job as a coach. You're going to show up and you're going to focus on, your athletes. But if you hide what's really true for you and what you're going through, you've missed a tremendous opportunity, a tremendous teaching opportunity for your athletes, and a learning opportunity for you to be able to say, hey, I'm not having the best day or the best week or the best month. And I'm not asking you to solve this for me and at a high level, like, here's what's going on in the background. But I want to walk you through the process that I am using today to take those things that are happening in my life and put them aside for this next period of time so that I can show up for you. And here's what I'm doing in my mindset. And here's how I'm prepared to be here. And here's how I'm going to be present. And here's how I'm going to take care of myself later.
Got it.
It's kind of funny today. It's just a funny story today that we're talking about it and it just happened. So we're in my weight training class, and I yawned today, and I had a kid come up and said, "I've never seen you yawn before." He was like, "What is going?" He was asking me all kinds of stuff, like, "What's going on? I've never seen that before. Are you okay? Are you tired?" I was like, "Hey." I just was kind of like, "Well, just guess I'm a little tired today." You know what I mean? And just kind of, it's just a simple little moment, but it's just funny that we're talking about that, and it happened today, and kind of, it's just interesting. It's just a funny little story. But
yeah, Apollo Ono used to do that before all of his speed skating races. Do you remember that? And he'd taken it from packs of lions, I think, who before they were going to go on a hunt, they would yawn and super oxygenate their bodies because they knew they were going to be exerting themselves.
It's just, go ahead. Sorry, I got nothing.
It's a calming technique, right? It calms your mind down and your body by, like you said, over oxygenating, and it's a relaxing method. If you're trying to fall asleep, you'll yawn. So you're not trying to fall asleep when you're going to be in a speed skating circle like Apollo Ono, but it helps. And that's I forgot that was even brought up on with interviews on Sports Center or whatever else. And he's being asked those questions. That's a great memory. That's nice job, Doc. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. Productive perseverance. So when I think of resilience, I thought about this section. This kind of speaks to me the most, because when I first think of resilience, this is what I thought of. But the other 4 components just as valuable. And you're right, it's the intelligent pursuit of a goal. You got to know when to keep going versus pivoting. But intelligent is, I wrote down as the key word. It's not random. It's a deliberate hunting for improvement. And so when I deal with my athletes, I use a basic MBA school SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But you also had a very similar approach. And I wrote, if you're building yourself as an athlete or an entity or a brand, discuss what productive perseverance really entails and means for these folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've come to believe that perseverance and resilience and even being gritty means simply never giving up.
Right.
And the most resilient people that I've interviewed, and I've interviewed hundreds of people and collected thousands of pieces of data on this, the most resilient people absolutely give up, and they also pivot and adjust their approach. And they also keep going when things get hard. So what does that mean? How do we make sense of that? So the practice of productive perseverance is not about simply putting our head down and being gritty. It's about determining the intelligent pursuit of a goal. And if there are still, opportunities on the other side of challenge versus are there diminishing returns, and continually assessing in the form of that feedback loop, like Ray Dalio talks about, what is the feedback that I'm getting as an athlete, on this. So like in business, for example, I think, I don't know about you, Lucas, but like Jim and I are definitely old enough to remember Blockbuster. Lucas, do you
Oh
remember
yeah.
Blockbuster? He's like,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Says, if you were born in the 1990s, you may not remember Blockbuster, right? But like many a Friday night was spent in a Blockbuster, browsing the shelves, or you'd be waiting out front to see like if someone was going to like return the latest Jurassic Park, if you could like get your hands on that, take that home and watch it. And so Blockbuster was incredibly perseverant. They were incredibly gritty. They were not changing their business model. They believed wholeheartedly in the brick and mortar stores and people coming to them to rent their movies, on the weekends and in holidays. Blockbuster's no longer in existence. Blockbuster's extinct. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that perseverance alone is not resilient. Right? Because what happened with Blockbuster is they didn't collect feedback in that feedback loop from their marketplace to understand that this little company called Netflix that was sending DVDs through the mail could actually threaten their market share. And so as athletes, it's not just about putting our heads down and being perseverant and going for our goals no matter what. It's picking our heads up and looking around and assessing, is this training program working? Is this nutrition program working? Is this the right coach for me? Is this the right school for me? Is this the right preparation for me? Is this the right mindset for me? And continuing to sort of titrate that approach over time and being willing to let go of the things that are not working, the things that have diminishing returns, and being willing to be gritty enough to continue to work even when things do get hard and do get challenging.
I wrote down Charles Darwin. He said it wasn't the strongest that survived or the smartest. It's the one that adapts the best, right? And when I saw that example you had there in the books, I'm like, I don't know if you've watched Free Solo with Alex Honnold. So Free Solo, so if you've seen it, he climbs El Cap out in Yosemite. First of all, he's been climbing his whole life. Second of all, he's been free soloing for, I think, at least 10 years. Third of all, he had mapped out all these different routes up El Cap. And then finally, hey, on this day I'm going. And he goes and he goes and he doesn't feel right and the route doesn't feel right. And so he pivots, he stops. He quits on that ascent, comes back down, right? But still weeks later, went ahead and still did it. So he still gets the big W, but had a loss along the way. He had to readjust his process, just like you said, and still got there. Like the goals are directional, but it wasn't happening this day. Okay, well, he's still the only one to climb the whole thing, 2/3 of a mile straight up granite without a rope ever, right? Like I was standing just next to it a month ago, and I'm like, I don't think I get up 15 feet, right? I love that approach there, Doc. In the practice of connection, you talk about doing it internally and externally. You mentioned that, and so like in football and all, I went back. I also listened. I cheated. I listened to your season 2, episode 20 with Seth Joyner, and I wrote.
It's a great episode. It's a great episode. We should put it in the show notes for
Yes.
people that want to hear it. Seth just blew it out of the park.
He's such an articulate speaker, right? He's
Isn't he amazing?
Great presence, and had great content. So, he had one D1 offer at UTEP, Texas El Paso. His mom tells him, "Don't come home," meaning keep your head down, keep going. And then he is drafted in the 8th round. Well, think about that, because right now, lately, the last 10 plus, 20 plus years. There's only 7 rounds. And the last guy drafted in the 7th round is called Mr. Irrelevant. Well, this guy was drafted when they had 8 rounds, right? So you take that, and then he's cut. But then 5 years later, he's a Pro Bowler, and then after that, he's a Super Bowl winner. And then what you wrote and what you guys discuss is that when you accept others' beliefs of you, 3 things occur. You settle for what's offered versus selecting opportunities. 2, you live a life that is smaller than what you're capable of, and you allow others to tell you who you are. And that just smashes your identity, right? You think you're something, and someone else says no, and you're like, well, I guess the answer is no, right? So what are some methods or tactics when you're dealing with an athlete or individuals, and you're like, they have that potential, but maybe they don't quite believe that yet. Maybe they've listened to some of the naysayers. And I'm guilty of that. You get your ass kicked in business for a few years running your gym. Well, you know what? Maybe I suck at this. And there's probably some things where I do suck at some things, right? Still to this day. But how do you help evolve that athlete to then realize, you know what, man, I really could. And if I do these things, I will. How do you get them to flip that switch a little bit?
Yeah. Well, and of course, as a coach, just like we talked about in Productive Perseverance, this idea of like where art meets science, coaching athletes, of course, is a tremendous art meets science moment, because we have players that don't listen to coaching when they should. And we're going to call that arrogance,
Yes.
And then we have players that don't believe in themselves when they should, and that leads to a sense of imposter syndrome or lowered self-confidence or a lower appraisal of what they're capable of. And both are dangerous, And so as an athlete, we get to ask ourselves, first and foremost, am I coachable? What does that mean? It means that I have a willingness to listen and take in information and feedback that is different from the perspective about myself that I hold. Right? Then we have to ask ourselves, where or from whom is that information coming, and are they a credible source? So in Seth Joyner's case, he had all kinds of people telling him that he wasn't going to make it as a D1 athlete. He wasn't going to make it in the NFL. Who were these people? Were they, luminary coaches and experts in football? No, they were friends and family members. Sometimes our friends and family members are like the worst supporters, because, we see an athlete out on the field, they're well known, they're playing on a big stage. And a lot of times we think, the people that I know can't become that. We have limiting beliefs about ourselves and the people that we're associated with, and we pass those limiting beliefs on to people that we're associated without realizing it. Like I had a friend, her grandma grew up in a small town and never left the small town, and she wanted to move to New York, and her grandma was like, don't move to New York, it's so scary, you're going to get mugged. And she's like, hey grandma, just because you didn't have the courage and the gumption to move to New York and try to make it doesn't mean I don't. So first we have to ask ourselves, am I coachable? Am I willing to take in information that is different from my own beliefs and perspectives about myself? And where is this information coming from? Is it a credible source? If I want to move to New York, has this person ever lived in New York? They haven't. So maybe they're not a credible source, right? Has this coach gotten a number of athletes into D1 programs or even moved the needle toward becoming a professional athlete? They have. Do they have my highest and best interest in mind? There's a lot of coaches out there that, aren't the best people in life, and they kind of choose a couple of athletes that they want to champion and they say to hell with everybody else. So does this person have my highest and best interests at heart? And therefore, am I coachable? Am I listening to their perspectives that are different or perhaps at odds with my own?
You'll see that at the college and pro level in a big way, in that if I'm recruiting all linebackers to play football, and I got several guys, but another coach recruited a linebacker that I did not recruit, but now I have another guy on the squad. My identity is tied up in these guys that I recruited. I'm going to feel a little vulnerable that, hey, this other guy that came along, I didn't recruit him, and he's doing okay. There's that natural tendency not to believe in the other guy that you didn't select, and it really can hamper folks. And you'll see it in the pros, where they'll draft somebody, and the statistics are still the same. If you're still the number one draft pick and you're the quarterback, it's still only a 50-50 chance that you turn out and you're legit. Like half of all number one drafted quarterbacks still suck, right? And then so the GM will stick with these folks, and the coaches will, because, hey, this is my guy, I picked him. I couldn't be wrong. And then so they'll hold on to that. But I like what Seth said, is that, hey, this guy when I was in high school said I didn't have it academically to compete at a D1 level in the academics. And he got real pissed off about it. But he also said, there's a little bit of truth to that, because it wasn't I wasn't intelligent, I just wasn't really applying myself.
Mm-hmm.
So he called me out on it. He assessed it and said, all right, I'm just going to try. I'm going to start trying now. And then he did just fine. So if you find that someone who's a credible source and they still kind of say, hey, I don't know about you, I don't think so, take that, make an adjustment and pivot, like you point out. And then now the whole deal, the whole story changes, because now you do have a shot, because the credible source gave you some direction, and now you changed, you evolved, right? So that can really be helpful if you have a good relationship there.
Yeah, it's one of those pivotal moments, right, where someone tells us something. I don't think you'll be able to, whatever it is. And then it's what we do with that information. Do we allow that information to ignite a fire within us to say, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to show them I believe this is possible for me? Or do we allow that comment to incinerate our dreams and our hopes for what we can be? And that's a pivotal moment. We talk about, Michael Jordan getting cut from his, whatever middle school freshman year basketball team. Every athlete has at least, one incredibly powerful, pivotal moment where things could have gone, either this ignites a fire within me or it incinerates my dream.
But there's a fire burning either way. You have to pick the one you want, right?
You channel it.
Yes.
Right? You channel that disappointment. You channel that feeling of being underestimated, that feeling of being condescended to, that feeling of not being believed in. And you say, okay, so what am I going to do with this?
Yeah. Now what? How do you respond? It's E plus R equals O. I can't remember the book that was out. Event plus reaction equals outcome. Event doesn't equal outcome. Event plus reaction to the event equals the outcome, right? That's awesome. Gratitude plus generosity, right? How and when is it daily routine? Is it morning? Talk about how that's a helpful piece of the puzzle in developing your process for resilience.
Yeah, so when I interviewed hundreds of people and collected thousands of pieces of data and looked at how did people effectively face challenge, one of the things that came through loud and clear was that some of the most resilient people were able to look on a challenge or to look on a trying moment and to somehow see the good in it. So not in the moment, again, like we talked about, not like, oh, great, I got cut from the team, this is fantastic, I'm really going to go home and build some character. But after some time, looking back on what happened, they were able to say to themselves, I see the good in that. I see how that ignited a fire within me. I see how that made me work harder. I see how that, changed my self-image, and I decided that I belonged here and I wasn't going to let anybody tell me that, I couldn't have what I wanted. And so being able to find gratitude for the challenges that have occurred, even though we wouldn't have chosen them, is the first part of that practice. And the second part, the generosity part, is the generosity of sharing our resilient stories with other people as coaches, as mentors, as older athletes, in a way that inspires and allows others to cultivate their abilities who are coming up behind us.
Yeah. You'll see all the time where like a walk-on makes it into college and into the pros. So another walk-on will say, if he can do it, then I could too. So it gives them a little bit of validation without them having done it yet, that it is first possible. Like it takes decades for Roger Bannister or for someone to break the mile. Everyone sees Roger Bannister do it. Then like dozens happen the next year. It's like, well, shit. If I knew it was really possible, then I guess I should probably start trying a little harder, right? So you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gratitude is, I think, as part. I suck ass at this. That when I'm in the middle of a whole shitstorm, that I'm not. If I can sit there and think, all right, this is going to help me. I'm gonna be thankful for this challenge. It takes some of the anger or hate or pain out of the situation because I'm refocusing it. If I'm sitting there and I'm just seething about this shitstorm I'm in, well, all that does is hold me back and hurt me, right? If I have a little bit of gratitude, then some of that pain starts going away out of my head and in my chest, and it's gone. All right, now I can operate better versus having that mental brick sitting there on my brain, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really the power of shifting our mindset from saying, why is this happening to me versus why is this happening for me? When we say, why is this happening to me? That is a victim mentality. That is someone or something is perpetrating something against me and I am powerless because it's happening to me. But if I say, why is this happening for me? What that allows us to do in that moment is to sort of expand the aperture of the issue, to sort of zoom out from the problem or the problems and to say, okay, what if I was looking at this from a bit more of an objective perspective versus subjectively being, down in the muck, what might this moment have the opportunity to teach me? What might this moment be showing me in my life that is a lesson I'm meant to learn? What might this pain be cultivating within me that is going to allow me to get better?
I like how Jocko would say good in this situation, but you asking that question, then good changes your mindset in one direction that, hey, this is actually good for me. But then with you asking that question, how is this, not why is this happening to me, but why is this happening for me? This then gives me a direction and a thought that I have to explore. And then I'll have an answer for me. So not only, all right, good, fine, whatever. But now I have a thought I have to explore now, this whole scenario or situation. I have a better understanding and a better approach to it simply by changing that one little preposition in the question. I love that. That's excellent, Dr. T.
Thank you.
Good job there. You are hired.
Yes.
The last one, practice of possibility. Perfection doesn't equate to excellence. No, it sure doesn't. I like the Navy SEAL approach. When I wrote down, a good plan today is better than the perfect plan tomorrow. Talk about why that pursuit of perfection isn't optimal, and discuss how that really holds people back, because it holds athletes back. If I'm not perfect at this, I might not even try.
Yeah, it's great. It stops a lot of athletes, I think, including very young athletes who have a lot of pressure from parents or caregivers or coaches around them to have a flawless performance. And, when I was out at Nike leading executive leadership development and talent strategy, there was a quote on the wall from Bill Bowerman. And so a lot of people know who Phil Knight is, and fewer people know who Bill Bowerman is. So Bill Bowerman was Phil Knight's track coach in college. And Phil brought him in on founding Nike as his coach. And so Bill, played a very important role in sort of coaching Phil in his early years. And in fact, the road that leads to the main entrance at Nike is called Bowerman Way. And so this quote from Bill Bowerman, Bill says, how does the quote go? It's, perfection is a luxury we cannot afford. Perfection is a luxury we cannot afford. So, I think about like how much money the founders at Nike made. They made a lot of dough, right? If Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight cannot afford perfection, I'm going to hazard a guess that you can't either.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because what Bill means to tell us is that the price of perfection is too high because it paralyzes us. It makes us feel less than. It's an unattainable goal, impossible standard. And so striving for perfection does not lead to excellence. It leads to paralysis.
For sure. That was highlighted in that Shoe Dog, that book about Phil Knight, and then Bill Bowerman is highlighted obviously with Without Limits with Steve Prefontaine. I think Prefontaine might be the only statue over on Nike's campus. That was an example of a coach who just loved everything about track and running better, where he's measuring the kids' feet for making their own shoes with the waffle iron. And it wasn't about like winning by all these lengths. It's, hey, I'm going to win and learn and then move on to the next task. It didn't have to be perfect, just get your W and move on, How about that slogan though? Just do it. Like that's maybe, in my opinion, one of the best slogans ever for a company, because eventually it just simply says, get off your butt and work. Right. And which is why your book is excellent. It gives you the thought process and the perspectives, but then you're still told to, get up and get going. Don't just read about it. Like
at the end of the day, when all of the excuses and the reasons and the procrastination and the not good enough and the not believing in ourselves, all that falls away. And all that's left is, are you going to do it or not? In the words of Master Yoda, do or do not. There is no try. Are you going to do it or not?
Right.
That's it. We make it a lot harder than it is. We say, oh, I'm not good enough. I did this. Oh, this happened at the last game. I froze here. I got to increase my stance there. My form's got to be better here. I got to be strong, but it's like, are you showing up or not? Are you showing up or not? Right? Like, I know we're coming to the close of our time here, so I'll just tell you like a quick, maybe story to wrap us up, and then like anything you have for me. But, one of the ways that you and I met, Jim, is I was part of the Great American Speak Off,
right.
And so they were doing this big American Idol, open call down in Miami. My partner, my fiance, finds this for me and he says, I think you should go do this. So I register like 4 days before the event, and leading up to it, right now I'm getting all the emails, I'm getting all the information. It's like 4,000 people have registered for this thing. Like we've all seen like the American Idol, sort of behind the scenes stuff on television. I'm picturing the line being out the door. And they were going to take 25 people. 25 people were going to go on to semifinals from that 4,000. Like that is a huge slashing of the field, for the next step. And to, add on, the people that were going to advance were going to receive a golden ticket, like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory style. So I pack my suitcase. I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling like, how in the world is it possible I'm going to get one of these 25 tickets out of 4,000 people in the field? And my fiance is, walking me out of the house, and he says, hey, just so you know, I really believe in you. And no matter what happens, do not come home without one of those golden tickets.
No pressure.
So I go down there, to Miami.
Right.
The next day, and I, put my lipstick on, do my hair, cross the threshold, and I get in there. And ultimately, they bring us all in this, giant ballroom. But I'm looking around, right? Like, checking these folks out. And, I'm counting the chairs, right? Like how many people are here and like multiplying it out. There's not 4,000 people there. Nope. There's not even 400 people there, right? There's like 360, maybe 380. So here's what happened. 4,000 people registered for this thing.
Yep.
Less than 400 showed up.
10%. Less than 10.
What does that mean? It means I had 10x'd my chances of getting to go back home because I got a golden ticket, right? But it's the simple power of showing up.
Right.
Was I going to show up or was I going to not show up? Like Michael Jordan, we love this quote, like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
Right? Because I showed up, I did something that 3,600 other people were not willing to do that morning, despite the fact that they registered just like me.
Yep.
And so when all else, when the excuses and the reasons and the bad experiences and the fear and the procrastination, when it all falls away, it all comes down to, are you going to walk your ass across that threshold or not?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
That's it. Just do it. Just walk around. Yes. Excellent. I got a couple rapid fire ones. I don't need a long answer. Just when you're working out, when you're working out, what do you listen to?
Music.
What kind?
Fun music. I have like this playlist. It's called Go, Go, Go. And so I'm always like adding, my son introduced me to like Zayd Wolf. He's got some kind of song that I'm liking a lot. What's that called, Lucas?
It's like EDM, I think.
Yeah.
It's like the electro stuff.
There's something to it. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Where's a place you haven't been yet and you want to go?
You know this from reading my book. Gosh, there's so many places I want to go. You know what? I'll say one that's not in my book. So I'm Greek. My family immigrated, probably 100 years ago. And I've never been to Greece. And I feel a great connection to that country, even though I've never been. So I'd love to go to Greece.
There you go. Favorite sports movie?
A League of Their Own.
Oh, all right, Dottie.
There's no crying in baseball.
Damn right there's no crying in baseball. Favorite sport to watch?
Swimming. Competitive swimming.
Are you more like in the Ledecky in the distance, or like Summer Sanders or Phelps in the short distance?
Both have tremendous strategy, just different strategy. I mean,
Sure.
If I said it was a lot of fun to watch, people do like 1,000 or something, like that's a long race to watch. So certainly the shorter races, are more exciting, but it's also interesting to see the strategy evolve in the longer races and how athletes are able to titrate their strength and their stamina over the course of a longer period of time.
What was your favorite stroke?
Front crawl, which is the race is freestyle, but
right. Oh man, was it the Beijing one where the U.S. was down, all four guys with Phelps, and they had to come? It was Lizak at the end, come pulling down and get the French, and it was all on freestyle. That was probably one of my two favorite moments in the Olympics. Who's your favorite athlete to watch?
Favorite athlete to watch? My sons.
Okay, all right. Favorite book?
Born a Crime by Trevor Noah.
I'm writing this down. Born a Crime. Favorite superhero?
Captain Marvel.
Okay. Favorite villain?
I don't think I have a favorite. I don't have a soft spot for a villain in my life.
Gotcha. If you're lifting in the gym, what's your favorite lift?
Like favorite body part or favorite exercise?
Favorite exercise.
Favorite exercise. Something where I can like maximize, like get a lot out of it. Like this is gonna like work like your shoulders and your triceps and your chest at the same time. Like some kind of thing like that.
Gotcha. Favorite quote?
I talked about Rilke earlier. Be defeated by greater and greater things. He also said, let life lead you. life is always in the right. And I think of that at times when I've done my best to go after something that I wanted or to achieve a goal, and I have just fallen short. And in the space between the energy and effort and the doing my best that I was able to put in that exists between the ultimate goal, I believe life and I let life decide for me, not as a cop out to I wasn't willing to give it my best, but I gave it my best. I gave it everything I had. I didn't leave anything on the table. And there's still an expanse between where I am today and where I want to be. And I let life then guide me from there. We've all had lots of rejections and lots of losses. And when I look back on those losses and rejections, as painful as they were, I can see now that it wasn't meant for me. No matter how much I wanted that thing or how much I believed that was the next step in my life, with a sort of expanded aperture, I can say, oh, I see now, hindsight being 2020, that wasn't meant to be. There was something else, that came into play. And so I think in those moments where we fall short of our goals, we've done everything in our power, we can believe in the wisdom of life and know that there is a path and meaning to what we're experiencing, even if we don't yet know what that path or what that meaning is.
Awesome. I love that. I wrote that down. Where can we find you?
Sure. Yeah, I live in Philadelphia. Come on over.
Okay. And you're up for an award there too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yes. Yeah, we'll see. Influencer of the year. I say, yes. I don't want to be influential. I don't want to be an influencer. I want to be influential. Yeah. So, website's a great place to see our offerings. It's resilience with a C, -leadership.com. We hang out a lot on Instagram, lots of free content there, podcasts, quotes, contests, opportunities. So head over.
What's the name of your podcast?
Flourish or Fold, Stories of Resilience.
Yes. They got good ones. Love it. Dr. Taryn, great time today. Thank you again. I'm blessed. People talk about when you go to these events that you're paying for what you learn there, but you also benefit from the networking. And I'm like, yeah. But I truly have with you and Mike benefited quite a bit. So a lot of gratitude on my end with you guys. It's been great working with you and looking forward to continuing together. So thank you. Thank you for the gift of your time today, the gift of the knowledge. You funneled decades of information in your head and you shared it with us. And so that's what an impact, which is what you're all about. So thank you for that. And for those that are looking to get a hold of us, you can send us questions at info@athlete-builder.com. Keep checking out things with the Athlete Builder Summit. It's June 22nd, half dozen speakers, lunches included. It's an all-day event where we got other people from our podcast on, and we're looking to make an impact with coaches and athletes, people from all around. So be looking around for that. But again, Taryn, thanks so much. Best of you, Mike, and the boys, and I'm looking forward to connecting again soon. And really great time. What a gift. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here with you and all of your listeners.
All right.